It was August 28th, 1963, a warm and bright day in Washington, D.C. The sky was clear. The sun rose early, and soft light touched the Lincoln Memorial. Many people came before sunrise. They traveled by bus, train, and car. Some people walked a long distance. Others hitchhiked. They were excited and also a bit nervous. They carried signs that said jobs or freedom. They held these signs high. They believed in change. They felt hope. They wanted to be part of history. They wanted to hear Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speak. The Lincoln Memorial stood tall. It was a grand place with large steps. People saw Abraham Lincoln's statue and thought about freedom. They remembered the past. They remembered the struggles. Many people felt that this place was special. It symbolized the fight against slavery. Now they came to fight for civil rights. They wanted justice and equality. They wanted to stand together. The morning air was fresh but also full of tension. Some people brought sandwiches in brown paper bags. Others brought water to stay cool. They were prepared for a long, important day. Some people were very tired. They had traveled all night. Their bus seats were not comfortable. Their necks hurt. Yet they smiled at each other. They felt unity. A man in a worn-out hat gave his seat to an elderly lady. She thanked him quietly. A young boy held his mother's hand. He looked around with big eyes. He saw men in suits, women in church dresses, and students in casual clothes. It was a mix of generations. Many church choirs wore matching robes. They planned to sing songs of hope and faith. A group of college students from the South arrived. They had faced trouble on the road. Some people yelled at them. Others threw garbage near them. But they did not give up. They wanted to be here. They wanted to be part of change. They carried small notebooks. They wanted to write down important words. They wanted to remember everything they heard. They also brought cameras. They hoped to take pictures of Dr. King. They imagined telling stories to their friends back home. They believed that this day would change the future. As the crowd grew, volunteers gave directions. They said, "Please move forward," and "Please make room for more people." The volunteers wore simple armbands. They guided people to different areas near the reflecting pool. Some people sat on the grass. Others stayed on the steps. People looked for shade under big trees. A soft breeze blew through the crowd. It felt like a small relief from the heat. People chatted politely. They introduced themselves. They asked, "Where are you from?" and "How was your trip?" Friendships began in small moments of kindness. Church choirs began to sing. Their voices rose in sweet harmony. They sang, "We shall overcome," and other freedom songs. The crowd hummed along. Some people clapped their hands. Others tapped their feet. A grandmother with silver hair closed her eyes and joined the song. She felt hope. A young couple danced a little, swaying side to side. The music brought comfort. It reminded everyone why they came. They came to unite. They came to show the nation that they wanted equality. They believed these songs could touch hearts. Television cameras were on high platforms. Reporters talked into microphones. They described the scene. They said, "Thousands are gathered here today." They mentioned Dr. King's name many times. Photographers took pictures of the large crowd. They wanted to capture the size of it. Newspapers planned to publish photos. Everyone wanted to witness history. Some people held small transistor radios close to their ears. They tried to hear the announcers. They wanted to know when Dr. King would speak. They wanted to be ready. On the side, behind the memorial, organizers checked the schedule. They looked at their watches. They whispered to each other. They worried about the timing. They had many speakers that day. They had music and prayers. They wanted Dr. King's speech to be near the end. They believed his words would inspire everyone. Mahalia Jackson was there too. She was a famous gospel singer. She stood patiently, waiting for her turn. She felt the importance of this event. She prayed silently. She asked for strength to sing with all her heart. People kept arriving. It was crowded, but it felt peaceful. One man offered cold water to strangers. Another person shared extra sandwiches. A teenager gave his seat to a tired mother with a baby. The baby cried softly. The mother looked grateful. She said thank you again and again. Nearby, a father lifted his little girl onto his shoulders so she could see. She giggled with joy. She waved her small hand at people. The father smiled. He felt proud to share this moment with his child. Suddenly, a group started chanting,
"Freedom now! Freedom now!"
They marched around with their signs. The crowd began to cheer. It created a wave of excitement. People turned their heads to see. An old man tapped his cane on the ground to the rhythm. A group of high school students joined the chant. Their voices were young but strong. The sound grew louder. It spread through the crowd. Some people joined with clapping. Others pounded their fists in the air. There was energy rising, like a warm wind of unity. As time passed, the sun rose higher. The heat grew. People wiped sweat from their faces. Children became restless. Parents tried to comfort them. But nobody wanted to leave. They wanted to wait for the most important speech. They heard rumors that Dr. King had something powerful to say. They believed his words could change hearts. They believed in peaceful protest. They believed in unity. They believed that one day, black children and white children could play together. They believed that justice would come. They were determined to stay. Finally, after many songs and speeches, Mahalia Jackson sang. Her voice was deep and full of emotion. She sang a gospel song that moved people to tears. She sang about faith in God, faith in change, and faith in love. The choir behind her swayed. The crowd became silent, listening carefully. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. It was a moment of deep spirit. It felt like the air itself carried her song. When she finished, applause shook the memorial steps. People cheered. Mahalia Jackson bowed her head humbly. Soon, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. approached the microphone. He looked out at the crowd. His face showed seriousness. He knew this was an important moment. The people grew quiet. They sensed something historic was about to happen. Dr. King paused for a moment. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Then, from somewhere behind him, Mahalia Jackson's voice called out, "Tell them about the dream, Martin!" The words were gentle but strong. They reminded Dr. King of his deepest message. He smiled softly. Then he began to speak. "I have a dream," he said. His voice was calm but firm. The crowd listened with all their hearts. They heard hope in his tone. They heard courage. People's eyes filled with tears. A young couple from Alabama held hands. They had traveled far, with very little money. They felt these words in their souls. An older man, who lost his job for speaking out, nodded slowly. He whispered, "Yes, yes." Dr. King's words were not just talk. They were promises of a better tomorrow. They were like keys unlocking a long-closed door. He spoke about children of all races playing together. He spoke about justice like a mighty river. He spoke about the chains of discrimination falling away. People felt joy and sadness at the same time. They remembered their struggles. They recalled humiliations and pain. But now they saw hope. They felt unity. The crowd was quiet, except for soft murmurs and occasional cheers. Dr. King's voice rose and fell, like a preacher in a church. He knew how to touch hearts. He knew how to paint a picture of a fair world. He also said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." These words sank deep. People who had suffered discrimination felt a gentle calm. They realized that love was stronger than hate. They realized that violence was not the answer. Dr. King's voice gave them courage. A group of college students who doubted the march now felt inspiration. They saw a new meaning in peaceful protest. They smiled at each other. They felt they were on the right path. Nearby, a preacher from Mississippi bowed his head. He remembered burned churches and cruel threats. He remembered fear. But now, Dr. King's words gave him strength. He felt a strong belief that love was the best way forward. He wiped tears from his eyes. A woman next to him put her hand on his shoulder. She understood his pain. She too had lost friends to hatred. But in that moment, both of them felt a gentle power in King's words. They felt a new sense of hope blossoming in their hearts. Dr. King continued, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." This idea comforted many. People had seen slow changes. They had faced broken promises and frustration. But King's statement reminded them that disappointment is temporary. Hope can last forever. A young mother, holding her baby, felt her spirit lift. She had traveled from Chicago with almost no money. But she had faith. She believed her child deserved a better future. King's words gave her peace. She felt strong again. She believed they would find a way forward. Behind the scenes, organizers breathed sighs of relief. The speech was going well. The crowd was listening. The day was unfolding as planned. They had feared chaos. They had feared violence from opponents. But now they saw unity and calm. They saw people hugging each other. They saw tears of joy. They felt proud to be part of this event. Some organizers held walkie-talkies, checking on the next part of the program. Others stood still, simply moved by Dr. King's speech. They realized they were witnessing something historic. Dr. King then said, "Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase." Many in the crowd thought about their journeys. Some had marched in protests. Some had been arrested. Others had lost friends who stood up for justice. But they kept moving forward. They did not know if laws would change quickly. They did not know if society would accept them. But they took that first step. They believed each step mattered. The crowd nodded. They felt united in faith. They wanted to keep walking together. A group of elderly women sat on folding chairs near the front. They wore hats decorated with ribbons. Their hands trembled slightly with age. But they listened intently to every word. One of them, who had seen many hard times, said softly, "I am so glad I lived to see this day." Another said, "My grandchildren will read about this in school." They smiled and held each other's hands. They felt a deep gratitude. They felt that their prayers were being answered. They believed Dr. King spoke for them and for future generations. As Dr. King's voice continued, the crowd became one collective spirit. Strangers hugged. People from different states and different backgrounds felt connected. They were united by hope. A few voices shouted, "Amen!" in agreement. The mood was serious but filled with joy. Some people raised their hands in the air, as if to catch the words. Others wiped their faces, overcome by emotion. A small group of children waved tiny American flags, smiling without fully understanding. Yet they felt a positive energy. This was bigger than any single person. Then Dr. King quoted, "Even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree." This touched many. Life was not easy for them. They had struggled. They had seen hate. They had seen violence. But they believed in planting seeds of hope. They believed in taking action, even if the future was not certain. A group of young activists at the back of the crowd felt a surge of courage. They had been threatened many times. They had lost friends who were too afraid to continue. But they decided to keep planting seeds of justice. They decided to keep going, no matter what. Nearby, a small band of street musicians played a gentle tune. They were not scheduled to perform, but they felt inspired. Their melody was soft and uplifting. Some people stopped to listen. They swayed to the music. They smiled at the guitar player, who nodded in return. The music blended with Dr. King's words, creating a tapestry of hope. Even the birds seemed to join in, chirping lightly in the trees. It was a moment of peace in a long struggle. It reminded everyone that art and words can unite the human spirit. Finally, Dr. King reached the climax of his speech. "Let freedom ring." He said those words with power and passion. The crowd erupted in cheers. They clapped their hands, stomped their feet, and waved their signs. Some cried tears of joy. Others chanted, "Let freedom ring! Let freedom ring!" over and over. It was as if the entire place vibrated with that phrase. Even people far at the back, who could barely see Dr. King, felt the message. They felt a sense of triumph. They believed these words would echo across the country. At that moment, a little girl sitting on her father's shoulders shouted, "This is our time!" Her voice was small but strong. People around her smiled. They repeated her words, "This is our time!" It was a simple statement, but it felt huge. Children had a voice. They deserved a future without discrimination. They deserved a world where they could walk freely. They deserved dignity. The father kissed his daughter's hand. He whispered, "Yes, baby, it is." The crowd felt moved by the innocence of this child who understood the importance of that day. When the speech ended, Dr. King stepped back from the microphone. There was silence for a moment. Then, applause broke out like thunder. People stood up if they were sitting. They clapped, they cheered, they embraced each other. Some people shouted, "Thank you." Others shouted, "Amen." It was a moment of celebration. Dr. King raised his hand in a small wave. His face looked humble. He thanked God silently for the strength to share his dream. He thanked the people for standing with him. He believed that together they could achieve change. After the speech, the crowd did not disperse immediately. Many stayed. They wanted to hold on to that powerful feeling. They wanted to talk with friends, to share their thoughts. People started singing again. They sang, "We shall overcome." Their voices were tired but full of spirit. Some closed their eyes, tears streaming down. They felt that something big had just happened. They felt closer to each other. They felt hope for tomorrow. They felt that maybe, just maybe, the world could be different. They believed it was possible. A group of reporters rushed forward to try and talk to Dr. King. He was ushered away by organizers. He needed rest, but he wanted to greet people. He shook hands with a few. He said thank you to anyone who spoke to him. Some people only managed to touch his shoulder briefly. They saw him as a beacon of hope. They saw a man who risked his life for justice. They respected him deeply. They wanted to stand by him in the fight for civil rights. Meanwhile, the crowd was abuzz with conversation. Many told their own stories. A man from Georgia talked about being arrested for protesting. A woman from New York talked about unfair housing policies. A teacher from California shared how she wanted to change lessons in her classroom to promote unity. They all found strength in each other's words. They saw that they were not alone. They saw that people across the country cared about the same goal. Some of them exchanged addresses. They promised to write letters and keep in touch. As the sun set, some people remained on the steps. They looked at the reflecting pool, where the water glowed with the colors of the evening sky. The day had been long. Some were physically exhausted. Yet they felt a spiritual energy that lifted them. They began to pack up, folding their signs carefully. They wanted to keep them as souvenirs. They wanted to remember this day. They wanted to show future generations that they were there. They believed that this day would become a milestone in history. Down near the water, a group of young singers began humming a lullaby. It was gentle and comforting. People gathered around them, listening quietly. Some sat on the grass, too tired to stand. A faint glow from streetlights lit the area. The city around them was preparing for the night. Cars passed by, honking occasionally. But the mood remained peaceful. The humming turned into soft gospel songs. A few more people joined in. They sang about hope, freedom, and unity. It was a sweet ending to a day of powerful words. An old bus driver sat on a bench, resting his weary bones. He had driven many miles to bring people here. He watched them with proud eyes. He thought about how, just that morning, these same people were quiet and anxious. Now they seemed alive with purpose. He felt happy to have helped. He felt proud to be a small part of history. He lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly, reflecting on the day. He smiled to himself, remembering the lines of the speech. He repeated in his head, "Let freedom ring." In one corner, some organizers discussed future plans. They wanted to keep the movement strong. They talked about voter registration drives. They talked about peaceful protests in different cities. They believed that if people remained active, real change would come. A few also discussed concerns. They worried about backlash from those who opposed civil rights. They knew the path ahead would be difficult, but they had hope. They believed that words could change minds. They believed in nonviolence. Dr. King's speech had reinforced their determination to stay on this course. At a nearby stand, a vendor sold ice-cold lemonade. Despite the late hour, many wanted a drink. They were thirsty from chanting and singing all day. People laughed softly as they sipped the sweet lemonade. They shared stories of the day's highlights. A man in a simple white shirt recalled how he cried during Dr. King's "I have a dream" line. Another woman in a bright red dress admitted she was skeptical at first, but felt something special in the crowd's unity. They realized how personal this day was for each of them. Some individuals had come alone, with no friends or family. They were lonely at first. But throughout the day, they made connections. They found new friends who shared their dreams. A lady from Tennessee met a group of teachers from Ohio. They all wanted to improve education for black children. They exchanged numbers. They promised to help each other. They felt the power of community. They felt that if they stayed united, they could achieve more. They left the Lincoln Memorial with hope in their hearts and new companions for the journey. As night fell, the city lights reflected on the marble of the memorial. The steps where Dr. King had spoken became quieter. Yet echoes of his voice seemed to remain. People who walked there later felt an almost sacred atmosphere. They imagined his words floating in the air. They felt a sense of reverence. Some knelt down to pray. Others just stood silently, remembering the roar of the crowd. They understood that something important had begun. They believed that a seed was planted. They believed that one day, that seed would grow into a strong tree of freedom. Dr. King and other civil rights leaders held a brief meeting that night. They discussed the next steps. They talked about how to keep momentum. They talked about the importance of staying peaceful. They knew the road was dangerous. They knew there were threats. But they also felt courage. They had seen the faces of thousands who believed in their dream. They thought about the children present that day. They wanted to protect them. They wanted those children to grow up in a world without hate. Dr. King smiled at his friends. He said, "We keep walking." For many, sleep did not come easily that night. Their minds were too full. They replayed the speech in their thoughts. They heard Dr. King's voice saying, "I have a dream." They felt the crowd's unity. They remembered the moment Mahalia Jackson urged Dr. King to speak about the dream. It was unforgettable. It reminded them that sometimes, one voice can ignite a movement. They realized that each person there had a role to play. They realized that the dream was not only Dr. King's, it belonged to everyone. It was America's dream. Decades later, people still talk about that day. They watch old footage of Dr. King standing at the Lincoln Memorial. They hear his voice, clear and strong. They see the sea of faces, black, white, young, old, all united for a cause. They remember the lines, "You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step." They understand that every person can make a difference. Love is greater than hate. Hope is stronger than despair. Faith conquers fear. That day was more than an event. It was a turning point. It was a moment that still inspires the world. Today, the march's legacy lives on in schools and in communities. People study the speech in classrooms. They learn about the bravery of those who marched. They learn about the power of nonviolence. They see pictures of old buses and worn-out shoes. They read stories of families who sacrificed to be there. They watched documentaries of the great crowd. They tried to imagine standing in that summer heat. They tried to feel the emotions of that day. Many say it still resonates. The "I have a dream" speech continues to echo through time. In some cities, new generations hold commemorative marches. They retrace the steps of the old civil rights leaders. They carry signs calling for justice and love. They sing the same songs. They chant the same chants. They feel connected to the past. They feel the responsibility to continue the dream. Some people bring their children, just like in 1963. They tell them, "You are the future. We must keep going. We must keep working for equality." The children listen. They feel pride. They hold their signs and walk with confidence. Yes, there is still work to do. Even now, discrimination can be found. Inequality still exists in many areas. But the spirit of that day in 1963 lives on. It reminds us that dreams can push us forward. It teaches us that peaceful gatherings can create change. Dr. King's message was not just for one day. It was for all time. We remember his words. We remember that faith is believing without seeing. We remember that love is stronger than hate. We remember that we must keep hoping, even when life is hard. As the years roll by, we see progress, but we also see setbacks. This is the nature of social change. However, the memory of that day keeps the flame alive. People revisit the Lincoln Memorial to reflect. They stand where Dr. King stood. They look out at the reflecting pool. They feel the grandeur of that place. They feel a sense of possibility. They recite the famous lines, "Let freedom ring." They remind themselves and others that the dream is not finished. It continues in every effort to break down barriers. For those who read about August 28, 1963, they should know it was not just a large gathering. It was a story of unity and hope. It was a tapestry of individual stories. People who overcame fear, people who saved money for the trip, and people who believed that words could move mountains. It was a story of a dream that reached beyond differences. It was a story of faith and action. It was the day Dr. King rose to the microphone and spoke for the voiceless. His words echo even now, whispering hope to future generations. We remember the old woman who traveled all night on a bus, her hands curled around a small bag of food. We remember the father who lifted his daughter high above the crowd, showing her a world of possibility. We remember the college students who came with doubts but left with determination. We remember the volunteers who handed out water and guided people to safe spots. We remember the quiet tears, the joyous applause, the shared songs. These memories help us understand the power of standing together for a just cause. The dream lives on in daily acts of kindness and perseverance. Each time a teacher tells students about civil rights history, the dream grows. Each time a person helps a neighbor, the dream breathes. Each time a community works to end prejudice, the dream lights up. We see Dr. King's vision in the eyes of those who refuse to give up. We hear it in the words of young activists who speak about fairness. We feel it whenever we choose understanding over anger. In these moments, August 28th, 1963, feels very close. And so, this story of August 28th, 1963, remains alive. It is more than just a date. It is a symbol of courage and hope. We are invited to join this story. We are asked to carry the torch of freedom. The steps of the Lincoln Memorial still welcome visitors. They whisper stories of that summer day. They remind us that dreams can catch fire in the human heart. They remind us that unity is powerful. They remind us that one voice, joined by many, can transform a nation. In the end, "I have a dream" is not just a speech. It is a call to action. It reminds us to be better neighbors, better friends, and better citizens. It tells us that love and respect are the keys to a good society. It echoes with the promise that we can all stand up for what is right. It does not matter how small we feel, or how big the problem seems. A single step can begin a journey. A single voice can spark a movement. This is the lesson of that special day. Let us remember the signs that read jobs and freedom. Let us remember the music that united the crowd. Let us remember the tears and laughter that blended into a hopeful harmony. Let us remember Dr. King's voice, steady and strong, calling us to dream big. Let us keep planting apple trees, even when tomorrow is uncertain. Let us keep taking steps of faith, even when we cannot see the entire path. Let us hold on to infinite hope, especially when disappointment feels heavy. Let us keep letting freedom ring, day after day. That day taught us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stand together. It taught us that peace is more powerful than violence. It taught us that real change begins in the human heart. The dream that was spoken on August 28th, 1963, is still unfolding. Each generation must nurture it. Each generation must carry it forward. And each generation can add new chapters to the story of freedom. With every step, we honor those who came before us. With every act of courage, we give hope to those who come after. May we continue to march, sing, and speak. May we continue to share stories that inspire. May we open doors for others, just as people have opened doors for us. The road is not always easy. Sometimes we face walls of hate. Sometimes we face setbacks that break our hearts. But let us recall that day in 1963, how thousands gathered in unity, how they stood under the hot sun, how they listened to words that stirred souls. It was a day that brought light into darkness. It was a day that still radiates, decades later. So, when you think of the Lincoln Memorial, remember the footsteps of countless dreamers. Remember the hush that fell when Dr. King spoke. Remember the collective heartbeat of the crowd. This was history, alive and real. It was people coming together for something greater than themselves. Even now you can close your eyes and hear the echo. I have a dream. It is still here, encouraging each of us to believe in a better tomorrow. It asks us to stand up, hand in hand, and declare that freedom must ring in every corner of the world.